possessed hunt. The small town of Ashton had always been a quiet place, nestled deep in the woods where time seemed to slow down. The children of the town often played in the forest, their laughter echoing through the trees, their games as innocent as could be. But there was one game, a game they played only in secret, that was older than any of them. It was called the hunt, and it was said to have been passed down through generations. The rules were simple. The children would split into two teams, hunters and the hunted. The hunted would scatter into the woods, and the hunters would give chase, trying to capture them before dawn. It was exhilarating, the thrill of being pursued, the rush of adrenaline. But there was one rule, an unspoken rule, that none of the children dared to break. Never play after dark. The town's elders spoke of the game with fear in their voices, warning the children not to venture into the woods once the sun dipped below the horizon. But like any good story, the warnings only fueled their curiosity. The older kids would often whisper about strange things that happened when the game was played at night, but the younger generation dismissed it as nothing more than superstition. One autumn evening, a group of 4 friends, Lily, Max, Emma, and Jake, gathered near the edge of the forest. They had heard the older kids whispering about the hunt and the dark secrets it held. This time, they couldn't resist. They would play the game at night. They laughed, their excitement pushing away any lingering doubts. The sun had barely set when they made their way into the woods, the trees towering over them, casting long shadows on the ground. The air had an eerie stillness to it, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. But the kids were too excited to notice. They were on the brink of discovering something great, something they had only heard about in hushed tones. Max, Emma, and Jake became the hunters, and Lily was chosen as the first to be hunted. She was quick, quiet, and full of energy, perfect for the role. She shot them all a daring smile before dashing off into the woods, the sound of her laughter fading into the distance. As she ran deeper into the forest, the excitement bubbled up inside her, but it wasn't long before she began to feel uneasy. The woods felt different at night, strange, unnatural. The usual sounds of the forest, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves, had gone completely silent. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Lily pushed through the underbrush, glancing over her shoulder to see if the hunters were gaining on her. The air was growing colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer, bending in ways they shouldn't. The farther she ran, the more she felt the oppressive weight of the forest closing in on her. Her heart raced, but she told herself it was just her imagination. It was just a game. She stumbled upon a path she didn't recognize, one that twisted deeper into the woods. The trees grew thicker here, their gnarled branches twisting into dark, skeletal shapes. A low fog began to roll in, the mist curling around her legs, making it difficult to see. Then, she saw it. A cabin, old and weathered, stood in the middle of the clearing. Its windows were shattered, the roof caved in places, and the door creaked on its hinges as if beckoning her to enter. Lily hesitated. There was something unsettling about the cabin. It was out of place, as though it had been there far longer than the forest itself. But curiosity got the best of her. She approached cautiously, her feet crunching on the dry leaves beneath her. The door groaned as she pushed it open, the smell of mildew and decay hitting her in waves. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the remnants of forgotten belongings lay scattered across the floor. But what caught her eye were the symbols etched into the wooden floorboards, strange runes that seemed to pulse with a dim, unnatural light. Lily knelt down, her fingers tracing the symbols. They felt cold, too cold for the time of year, and an eerie sensation crept up her spine. There was something off about this place, something wrong. But before she could pull her hand away, a sharp sound echoed through the cabin, the sound of footsteps crunching on the forest floor. The hunters. Lily's heart pounded in her chest. She jumped to her feet, rushing toward the door, but it slammed shut before she could reach it. Panic surged through her. She turned, her eyes scanning the room for an escape, but the room felt smaller. The shadows seemed to close in on her. A voice called from outside, too close for comfort. "Lily, where are you?" Max's voice, but it sounded strange, slower, deeper, almost empty. Lily's pulse quickened. She backed into the corner of the room, trying to control her breathing. There was something wrong with them. Something terribly wrong. She had to get out. The door creaked open, and there they stood, Max, Emma, and Jake. But their faces were pale, their eyes sunken and dull, as though the life had been drained from them. They moved slowly, deliberately, their bodies stiff and unnatural. "We found you," Max said in a voice that sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't his voice. It was distorted, hollow, as if it were being spoken through something else, something dark. Lily tried to move, but her legs wouldn't obey. A cold, invisible force seemed to hold her in place. She could feel the hair on the back of her neck stand up as the shadows in the room stretched toward her, their edges curling and twisting like tendrils of smoke. "Do you remember the rules of the game, Lily?" Emma asked, her voice cold and emotionless. Lily's breath caught in her throat. "What's happening to you?" Jake stepped forward, his eyes empty of any recognition. "The game is over, Lily. It's never really over." Suddenly, a low growl rumbled from the floor beneath her feet. The wooden floorboards trembled, and Lily felt the unmistakable sensation of something ancient and evil awakening. The symbols on the floor glowed brighter, their energy seeping into the very walls of the cabin. "Let her go," Lily screamed, but the words were torn from her throat by the force of the darkness now surrounding her. Max, Emma, and Jake didn't respond. They continued to move toward her, their steps unervingly synchronized, their eyes locked onto her as if they were no longer human. Something dark had taken control of them, and it was too late to escape. As the last of her strength faded, Lily realized the truth. The hunt was never just a game. It had been a ritual, a sacrifice to something old, something hungry. The children who played it were drawn into its web, their souls bound to the forest forever. Lily's vision blurred as the shadows wrapped around her. Her screams were swallowed by the deep, ancient darkness of the woods. The hunters had caught her, and now she was one of them, possessed, twisted, and bound to the forest forever. The next morning, the town found the forest eerily quiet. The children were never seen again, and no one dared to speak of them. But those who ventured near the woods late at night sometimes heard the faint whispers of children's laughter carried on the wind. And if you listened closely enough, you could hear the sound of footsteps just behind you, as though you were being hunted. And somewhere in the dark corners of the woods, the hunt continues.